It's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Wisdom Wednesday presented by DraftKings, America's #1 rated sportsbook app. And if you are watching on YouTube, I have to lean up a little bit. I got my DraftKings shirt on today. Love the DraftKings Sportsbook. Love when you guys throw the code Ross in before you make your bets. By the way, today's wisdom coming from Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl, the executive director. Absolutely an awesome guy to talk to. You want to talk about imparting wisdom? This is his time of year. Well, this and late January when they run the Senior Bowl are his times to absolutely shine. We'll get to Jim in just a minute. You can check him out on Twitter at @JimNagy_SB. We'll have a Spread the Word winner tomorrow with Greg Cosell at RossTuckerNFL, at RossTuckerPod. Sponsor confirmation email winner tomorrow, and the YouTube shout-out winner, youtube.com/RossTuckerNFL. We've got some stuff to get to a little bit later with some retirements, Alex Smith, Jordan Reed. But right now, it's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, it's so funny, Jim. I was just thinking about, if you look in my background, okay, I've got all the helmets of the teams I played for. I think, Jim, you were with me for three of the 4 helmets or 3 of the 5 helmets. Both of those Washington helmets. Although I don't know if you were there in 2002 or not. And then certainly the Patriots again in 05-06.
Yeah, I was there in Washington when you came out, and I was in New England when you came there as well. I remember actually speaking with you in the building in New England a couple times.
Yeah, I've told the story when you've been on before, and Jim's been on the College Draft podcast as well. But you were the first person that ever told me about ProFootballTalk.com. That was like 2006. I had never heard of it, and you told me about it. Before we get into this time of year and the draft stuff, you're killing it, man. I mean, you've done an unbelievable job with the Senior Bowl. Kudos to you and the Senior Bowl staff for getting that game played, getting everything you got done when all the other ones just kind of canceled. And then obviously all the stuff you're doing on ESPN now. Really, really cool to see you flourishing in your multi-roles. And it seems like you're liking it.
Yeah, it's been a nice change, Ross. I mean, this has been a challenge here at the Senior Bowl. Really made the jump from the NFL to the Senior Bowl. It's a family decision. We just happened to be living in Mobile, Alabama for 13 years when this job came open. And son's getting to play high school sports now. My daughter's, growing up faster than I wish she was. And this was an opportunity to be around more. When you're on the road scout and you're gone 175, 200 nights a year, and this job was it came along at the right time. I feel very blessed that I was their guy, that they picked me, and it's been a fun 3 years. It's been a fun 3 years. It's been a blast.
Yeah, well, you've done an unbelievable job with it. Hard to believe it's been 3 years already, by the way. And I'm sure this year was the most challenging. But you also have how many years of experience with what teams as a scout, Jim?
I was in the league 18 years, so did an internship year in Green Bay in '96, the Super Bowl year there. So got really fortunate to be around a great team and see how that team was built and what made that team great. Then went to Washington when you were there. And from there, I went to New England. I had a nice long run in New England for 7 years. Then went to Kansas City with Scott Pioli. I got a really good experience there. Kind of, a promotion kind of got me all over the country, traveling all around the country, seeing players. And then didn't work out, which it doesn't always work out in football. We didn't win enough games. So, and then ended up my last 5 years in Seattle and again, got to be around another Super Bowl team. So it's great experience, like seeing, and they were all different. That Packers team, the Patriots team, the Seahawks team, very different ways of team building in the 3 places, place value on very different things when it comes to players and their makeups and what they're looking for. So really valuable experience. And then coming here to the Senior Bowl, like I said, the last 3 years.
So I think that's interesting. This is what I love about you is like, I got a bunch of questions for you, but that is interesting because you've been a part of 3 different Super Bowl franchises, but you said that what they value, how they build it, is very, very different. Can you expound upon that a little bit? Because I do think at times, there's a narrative in the media that like this is the way you win, like this is the right way to do things. But it sounds like those teams all obviously did the right things to win a Super Bowl, but did it differently. How were they different?
Well, I think Green Bay's really unique. Just with publicly owned team, not an owner. You're out there. It's kind of Green Bay's kind of an outpost. And that was when Reggie White was the huge first free agent signing in the history of the league. He really kind of changed the narrative about going and playing in Green Bay, and then obviously Favre coming in. But it was a really tight knit group of guys. It's a very small town, Green Bay. I mean, you're talking about a population, I believe, of less than 200,000 people. You're just driving around. There's no skyline. There's no big buildings. And then there's just this huge stadium that pops up out of a neighborhood, which is crazy. I know you've played there, Ross. But so that's just unique how you need to put that football team together, because they spend a lot of time together, more so probably than the other teams I worked at. And then, being a part of the Super Bowl a few years back in Seattle when we played New England, it was very interesting because you couldn't come at it from two polar opposite ways of building a football team, from how the scouting department's structured and different values they place, and just the feel of the building and the culture. New England's very buttoned up and it's very businesslike and straightforward. And Seattle's just kind of controlled chaos. It's a blast. Pete Carroll's riding down the hallways on scooters, and there's music blasting out of every office. And it's just we could do a whole show on this. We could do a couple hours on this, but yeah, very different ways. Like you said, there's not one cookie cutter way. They obviously all work. I mean, Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll were the tone setters of those two programs, and the programs really took on their personalities. And you can't say one's better than the other because they've both gotten great results.
All right, so let's get into the draft, Jim, because you're obviously all over it. What are teams doing right now? We are 8 days away from the first round of the NFL draft. What are the teams doing right now?
They're really wrapping everything up, Ross. This time of year, you've either met in December or February or both, and then you come back in April, and you're really trying to tie up all the things that you heard from the pro day circuit, so you have the floor again as a scout to talk about things you heard at the pro day, interactions you had with the player you observed, talk about his workout, did he test as well as we thought, maybe not as well, reconcile that with what you saw on the tape. And what happens inevitably in every draft room is there's clusters of players, at every position group. So there's a cluster of 5 offensive linemen, that are all graded very, very similarly. And then the GM will just dispatch a group of scouts and coaches together and be like, hey, guys, go watch those 5 guys. Don't come back into the room until you guys figure them out and have a consensus of where they stack. And if that group can't work through it, then you work through it as a bigger group. But so there's a lot of that stuff being done. I think now they're really talking through strategy, especially the upper level guys, the GM, the director level guys are going through strategy about, where do we address certain position groups? You're going through depth of each position. Do we need to take a receiver up this high when we know we can get one down here? That's a similar player. So a lot of strategizing. I think again, on the director level, you're reaching out to a lot of other teams and having those trade scenario discussions about, hey, will you be willing to move off here if your guy's not there? We'd like to move. You really got to lay the groundwork for those draft day trades right now. And then the scouts are all reaching out to players. And this is going to be a crazy year for undrafted free agency. That is complete chaos every year. There's no way around it. Some teams have streamlined it a little better than others, but it gets hairy. It's like kind of the NFL's version of Wall Street, there after the draft, that hour after the draft is insane. But in this year, especially, I think the word got out. Kaylin Kaler did a great piece that she posted on Twitter this week. And it was about how many players have signed with agents this year. And right now we're a little under 700, whereas the last 2 years we're like 1,800, 1,900, which tells you that pool of undrafted rookies is so much smaller. So these scouts are on the phone with these guys and really trying to recruit and connect and, again, lay the groundwork for, hey, man, we've got a late draftable grade on you, but if it doesn't happen, it's out of my control. We might have other needs there late in the draft. If we don't pick you, it doesn't mean we don't like you. We really want you to be a Patriot or a Seahawk or a Packer. But so again, that's a lot of what the scouts are doing right now, is really trying to connect with these later round picks and free agents.
I don't understand the 700 compared to 1800 thing. Why is that the case?
Because so many guys opted back in, Ross. They're taking advantage of that extra NCAA year that was granted because of COVID. So next year's, and it's going to have a trickle-down effect. Like next year's class is going to be bloated. The year after, I mean, we're talking probably to 2024, 2025. The draft is going to feel the effects of this past year with COVID.
Got it. So that many guys are taking advantage of their extra year. What I've noticed is guys that in other years would have gone pro, they are transfer portaling it, going somewhere else, for the last year to see what they can do there. Gosh, there's so many things here. So you mentioned the complexities with the process this year. It's been documented a lot. What are they, Jim? And are they as big a deal as all of the people will make it out to be, or is it a little bit overblown?
No, it's been a challenging year on these guys for sure. Last year, everyone thinks last year was impacted by COVID because we all sat around and watched the virtual draft on TV. But what people lose sight of, scouts were on the road last fall, the fall of 2019. They were in the buildings every day. They were getting real information. And this year's been totally different. They were able to go to games on Saturdays, but not be on the field. I mean, it's literally go to the game, sit in the stands or the press box, and leave the stadium. So they couldn't be in the buildings. The schools were great about setting up Zoom calls with everyone on their staff. And they were gracious enough with our Senior Bowl staff of letting us on those Zoom calls as well. So we were in on all those conversations. And as good a job as the schools did, the information was still pretty vanilla, right? I mean, we're all human. I mean, if you were the offensive line coach, wouldn't you be a little more forthcoming if you had a relationship with a scout for the past 20 years and he came into your office and shut the door and it was just you and him talking? I mean, that's what the teams are missing out on, rather than being on a Zoom with 80 dudes. So what they're really trying to do right now is get a handle on who these guys are as people. They had more time to watch tape because they weren't crisscrossing the country. They weren't burning 6 hours a night driving from one school to another. So in terms of tape and report writing, they had plenty of time. But it's getting to know these guys, and that's by far the hardest part of the process. I think tape is the easiest part of it, after you've done it a long time. But it's really figuring out these guys as people and what makes them tick and what they're going to be with more money and more time. I mean, all those different factors. So that's why the Senior Bowl, that was a huge selling point for us this year, was because we were the only time where these prospects were going to get face-to-face time in interviews and be seen on a field. There was only one GM I talked to this entire fall, and I think I've spoken to everyone in the league at this point, that actually went out to games this fall, because they either went to a game on Saturday and then would have to sit out of the team's bubble for 3 days before they could re-enter. And most of the GMs like going to the games on Sunday and being with their teams. So of the guys I talked to, only one of them was out at college games. So the Senior Bowl was the only opportunity for the decision makers to see these guys with their own eyeballs and get in front of them and have face-to-face conversations. So it's been hugely impacted, but really it's just the access to the players and access to the people at the schools that really impacted the process.
You mentioned the higher level guys and going over the strategy stuff. One thing that feels like it's changed recently, and maybe this is how it's always been, it feels like the circle of decision makers has gotten smaller and smaller. Like, I'll talk to scouts, Jim, and they'll be like, yeah, I have no idea what they're going to do. I just tell them about my guys, and then they just kind of do what they're going to. Like, it feels like, and maybe it's different from team to team, but I've heard about teams having like separate draft boards, secret draft boards, only the owner and the head coach and the GM look at it. Like, what's your understanding of this, the lengths that teams go to keep their true intentions secretive?
Yeah, this is a sensitive subject for me. If that's the direction it's going, and I don't know if it is or not. I haven't talked to many guys on that level, but it very well could be. But I've been kind of part of different situations like that, and what it does when you kind of pull in ranks and tighten that circle, it eats away at the morale of a scouting staff. Like if you can't trust your guys that they're going to stay tight-lipped and not share information and let leaks get out, well, then get rid of them and hire somebody else. But I know, speaking from experience, you feel so much more connected when you feel a part of the entire process. I mean, we talked about it earlier. I mean, that's a hard occupation, man. I mean, people don't want to hear that, but when you're away from your families, I don't care if you're a trucker or you're in the military, when you're away from your family, that as much as scouts are, that's a grind. And you put in all that sacrifice. When you get closer to the draft, you want to feel a part of it. Like you've put in all the work. So when teams do cut their guys out of it, it just, to me, it sends a really bad message. And again, if you can't trust your guys, you've got the wrong guys. I think the teams that do it best keep their staff connected all the way through, because that's where guys want to work. I think those teams have an advantage getting a better scouting staff, putting a better staff together, because that stuff gets out around the league. I mean, guys know which teams are better to work for and which teams aren't. But you might be right. I mean, I've heard that from a couple of teams, like, hey man, we're closing ranks at this point. I'm like, what are you talking about? Why are you closing ranks? Like that's your group of guys. I mean, it's like 10 to 12 people. Like, how can you not trust those people? But yeah, there might be something to it, Ross. You might be onto something.
Jim, that what you said, that's a life lesson, right? Like, you need to include people in the process. Like that matters. And you're right. If you don't trust them, why do you even have them? It's such a good point by you. A couple other things I wanted to hit on. We hear about draft boards for different teams. I think the thing that would surprise people is how different draft boards can be from team to team. I don't know how to phrase this question, Jim, but if you looked at all 32 different draft boards, right? How much do you think would be very similar, and how much would be different? How much variation is there from team to team on their draft boards, do you think?
Yeah, they're kind of like snowflakes, I guess. They are different. I mean, I don't think they're wildly different. I think that at most positions, especially at the top, they're all talking about close to the same players. It's just where they have them stacked. And again, it goes back to organizational philosophy and what the head coach wants in players and what they want in people. I can speak from my experience in Seattle. Like, we wanted a bunch of alphas on our team. You look at how they were built when they were winning Super Bowls. You had Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor and Doug Baldwin. I mean, you had some really big personalities on that team. And going back to my experience with the Patriots, some of the teams you were on, look at that defense with like Junior Seau and Teddy Bruschi and Mike Vrabel and Rodney Harrison. There were some alphas on that team too, but again, so back to your point. Yeah, the boards are all different. I think when you get into the later rounds is where it really starts to vary. Probably rounds 5 through 7. There's some teams that want to take shots on height, weight, speed guys and guys with developmental traits, and other guys just want to take a safe football player. They know even if he's just at minimum a career special teams guy, let's just draft a player that's going to make our team and get to the game on Sunday, and maybe not try to hit that home run, maybe just try to hit a single or double.
Are there some guys that you can think of, Jim, that the league is a lot higher on than the media? Because it's interesting. You see these guys like, Davis, the linebacker from Kentucky, or other guys that seemingly come out of nowhere. I don't know how that happened. Supposedly he got a 4th or 5th round grade from the NFL or somebody, and now he might go in the 1st round. Are there guys that you know about that teams are generally higher than maybe the draft gurus, the analysts, the guys that do the mock drafts realize?
Yeah, for sure. And that really more so like a couple months ago, it was really out of whack, like around Senior Bowl time, January, February, and then stuff does start to leak out. It does start to trickle out to the media, who the league's really on. So it's tightened up a little bit. That's when in the media, when you see it looks like guys are falling, it's really the media catching up to where the league has players. So they're not, that's the interesting dynamic here in like March and April, is you hear a lot about guys climbing and dropping. they're really not in the NFL. That's where they've always been. They're really dropping and climbing on the media side. So particular players for this year's draft, I'm kind of peeking over the camera now at our board right now of where guys have players. I mean, man, there is a handful. There is a real, I mean, I would say Landon Dickerson is a guy. I'm looking at the center position. Creed Humphrey. I haven't seen Creed Humphrey from Oklahoma in any mock first round drafts. I mean, this guy's going to be a 10-year pro and Pro Bowl player. And, you know, and if you have a chance to get one of those, why wouldn't he go in the first round? Just looking across this board, Trey Sermon at Ohio State, the running back, the league's high on him. You don't see him in barely anything in the media. So there's a number of them. Divine Diablo, safety from Vatech. I don't think he's getting out of the first 40, 50 picks. You don't see him talked about a lot. So there's a number of guys, but again, it's probably tightened up in that area since January, February.
It's interesting because I saw you tweet this morning about Damar Hamlin and from Pitt and his cover skills. He was a really good corner in high school. That's what he played. And I don't know if he played corner his first couple of years at Pitt or not. I don't know what they did there, but I think people thought he'd be a corner. And I'm sure you already knew that, but that's like, you know, I do all the Pennsylvania State high school championship games, and he was a good high school corner, which obviously benefits him. How much, I guess that's the last question, Jim, how much research do these guys do into like the high school backgrounds, right? So I'm here in Harrisburg, Jim. You know, Micah Parsons never played a snap of linebacker in his life until he went to Penn State. He was maybe the best high school edge rusher I've ever seen. It was crazy, but he's only been off the ball, Jim, seeing things like that for 2 years. Like, I just think he can be so much better when he actually can process things that quickly. I wonder, I'm curious, how much work do they do on the high school side of things to really see how much these guys have left?
A lot. And what you just did, Ross, that's exactly how you would make your case in a draft room for a player. I mean, when you can go back to high school and talk about what he did. I mean, Divine Diablo, another guy. I mean, he played like he was like a big wideout or H-back type player for Vatech his freshman year. He was only played defense for 3 years. So it really helps you build a case. Again, when you're talking about guys that like maybe like projection guys, you know, when you're talking about running backs, you know, do they play some fullback in high school that we haven't seen yet? Or if you've got a linebacker that maybe you want to, you know, kind of a down the line linebacker who's going to be nothing more than a backup as a linebacker, but you need a fullback. Say your team likes a fullback. We'll dig back into his high school background, and maybe he was a great high school fullback. And just being back there and even doing it at the high school level, there's some familiarity. He's done it. He knows angles. He knows where to insert and how to strike from that side of the ball. So they do. They dig in big time. And that was always the first question that Pete Carroll asked any player when he came into the combine interviews in Indy was, talk to me about your high school experience. You know, what other sports did you play? What positions did you play? Really to dig into that background of the athlete. And I think, and more to that point, Ross, I think teams are really digging into high school track stuff. And so we do that at the Senior Bowl. We use the high school track stuff a bunch because Phil Savage, my predecessor, gave me a great heads up before I took the job. He's like, Jim, your draft is in late November, not April. Like, you got to figure those players out. And so we've really dug into the high school speed stuff because we don't have the benefit of the combine when we invite these players to the Senior Bowl. So they do. Back to your question, they really dig into high school stuff pretty heavily.
So the key now is to follow Jim on Twitter at @JimNaggy_SB. Follow the Senior Bowl at Senior Bowl. That way you can see the great tweets from Jim. He usually has video clips with it, and you can see what he's up to. Jim, fantastic stuff. Really appreciate the time. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. This was fun. Thanks for having me on.
Love Jim Nagy. That guy was awesome in Washington. He was awesome in New England. He's still awesome now. You know what else is awesome? MyFrontPageStory.com. Mother's Day will be here before you know it. Most of you are loyal listeners. Most of you have heard me talk about it before. Most of you have not ordered a story from myfrontpagestory.com for your mom. Trust me, she'll love it. Being able to give her that framed picture that looks like it's on the cover of the newspaper and saying, hey, Mom, I want to do something special for you, so I wrote a story about you. That's unbelievable. I had a story written about you. Incredible. And then when she actually reads it, she will cry happy tears. Trust me, fellas and ladies, myfrontpagestory.com.
Tuck's Takes.
Good morning, Ross. Let's start with a couple of notable retirements. You alluded to them earlier in the show. First, Alex Smith, 16 years in the NFL. The other, tight end Jordan Reed, after 9 seasons in San Francisco.
So, and that's after a nice season with the Niners, not 9 seasons, Bri.
You're right. Sorry.
For those of you that aren't watching on YouTube, Bri just put his glasses on, his reading glasses on. When did they start to go on you, Bri?
About 2 years ago, but it's I need them on pretty much all the time.
How old are you?
48.
So when you were like 46.
Yeah, 45, 46 is when the I really started using them all the time.
And you only notice it when you're reading, right?
Correct. Or staring at a screen. Like if I'm reading a book or a newspaper, it's not as bad. But if I'm staring at a screen for some reason, it gets worse.
Okay. That hasn't happened to me yet.
You got to look forward to, Ross.
I know. Gosh, getting old stinks. Anyway, Alex Smith, 16 years. What he did last year, I will never forget the rest of my life. Unbelievably impressive. I'm excited to see what he does next. I just don't think he was that interested in just being a backup. I just think he'd rather do something else with his life. So kudos to him. Sounds like he had some opportunities to sign places. Jordan Reed evidently got some type of scan of his brain and was advised to retire. So I guess I have mixed emotions about that, Bri. On the one hand, I am really happy that Jordan Reed, who's got a lot of concussions, got a scan of his brain and got that information and made what sounds like the smart decision to retire. On the other hand, it makes me sad that there was something on the scan that compelled him to retire.
Tuck's Takes.
Speaking of the 49ers, former Niner Aldon Smith recently signed with the Seahawks, is wanted on charges of assault down in Louisiana.
It's weird because I guess he hasn't turned himself in yet. We probably would know about it. If he did, maybe they're making those arrangements. It also seems like he didn't tell the Seahawks about this before he got signed. Yikes. He's been a troubled young man throughout his time in the NFL. And, there are people like that I think we all are rooting for and hope figured out. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear the percentage of how many of those guys ever actually do.
Tuck's Takes.
On to the transaction front, the Bears re-signed safety Tayshaun Gibson, Raiders inked cornerback Rasul Douglas, and the Steelers signed head coach Mike Tomlin to a 3-year extension that goes through 2024.
Gibson started every game for the Bears last year. It's interesting. Some of these guys that sign now, there just wasn't a lot of interest in their services. He probably got about the minimum, Tayshaun Gibson, even though he started every game for the Bears. Rasul Douglas, I thought had a decent season for Carolina. Evidently, they didn't think he did. They didn't have much of an interest in bringing him back. Mike Mayock, very familiar with him from the Eagles preseason when Mike Mayock called the games before I did. So he obviously knows the good and bad of Rasul Douglas. Mike Tomlin deserves it. He's an outstanding coach. Obviously, everybody's already tweeted about the fact that, the Steelers have only ever had 3 head coaches, which is just unbelievable, like in the last 60 years. But Tomlin's an excellent head coach. And the only other thing I'd mention is Daquan Jones signed a 1-year, $4 million deal. Oh, geez. And now I'm blanking with who he signed it with, Bri. Unbelievable. Now I got to look it up. That's embarrassing. I just saw Daquan Jones sign. Who was it? He signed with Carolina. They needed a run stuffing D tackle. He actually got $4 million, I think, fully guaranteed to be their run stuffing D tackle. So he waited. Good for him to get to get $4 million fully guaranteed as a run stuffing D tackle. Other than that, Bri, some shout outs are in order. Pizza Boy Brewing, Sporticulture, Vision Comics with an X, HumanHeadNYC.com. They're all, I think we're done here. Patrons, patreon.com/RT Media. Yesterday on the Even Money podcast, we went over the DraftKings $50,000 free-to-play pool. So even if you're in any of those states where you can't legally bet on DraftKings Sportsbook, you can do the free-to-play pool. You just answer 10 questions. Listen to the Even Money podcast yesterday. You'll enjoy that. Today, we are going over the rookie running backs, the draft prospect running backs on the Fantasy Feast podcast with Graham Barfield. He's got that awesome yards created metric that I think you'll really enjoy. We'll have Greg Cosell talking draft DBs tomorrow on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. And Andrew Brandt today is going to go over the Super League. And I have to listen to that or watch it on YouTube because I don't really know what's going on with the Super League. So make sure you listen or watch the Business of Sports podcast. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, RossTucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.
A lot of times on the show, I mentioned DraftKings. Here's what you need to know. You got to be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. By the way, if what I was talking about included a deposit bonus, doesn't always, sometimes it does. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough, and deposit bonuses are paid out in site credit.